Hey guys, Argent Templar here. This will be a relatively short one. This was something I completed after I was done the main arguments, and it's kind of a supplemental that I didn't really know where to put, so it's just going to be its own short-ish video. So this is the argument from Degree. So we begin as always with a quote. When there enters into it a glow from the divine, the soul gathers strength, spreads two wings, and however distracted by its proximate environment, speeds its buoyant way to something greater. Its very nature bears it upwards, lifted by the giver of that love. Surely we need not wonder that it possesses the power to draw the soul to itself, calling it back from every wandering to rest before it, for it came everything, nothing is mightier. Plotinus. Plotinus? I think it's Plotinus. Plotinus, which is very confusing because Plotinus founded Neoplatonism, and his name sounds kind of similar to Plato's. So yeah. So background on Platonism and Neoplatonism. So Platonism and Neoplatonism are rationalist philosophies. That is, they start with universals and go to a specific. Rationalism starts with a universal. It's deductive reasoning, which starts with a universal and applies it to a specific circumstance. So the classic rational argument is, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, so Socrates is mortal. This is in contrast to inductive reasoning, which starts with a specific and goes to a general. So that would be like, I drop a hammer, the hammer falls to the ground, therefore gravity exists. Makes sense? One's more empirical also, and one's more theoretical. Eventually this debate kind of ended with Immanuel Kant, but it still occasionally comes up, and it's important to understanding things like Platonism. There are also idealist philosophies. Now, idealism kind of has a colloquial meaning, which is a bit similar to romanticism. Idealism commonly means you believe the best thing will happen. You believe everything will work out good. You kind of have the faith that things are just going to be all right no matter what. That's not what idealism means in this case. Idealism as a philosophy means that you believe the theoretical comes before the real. It tends to say that the real nature is abstract and metaphysical, and the material world is merely a reflection of that. Plato is probably the ultimate idealist philosopher. Another form of idealism was advanced by Berkeley, who was a British priest, who believed that we were all thoughts in the mind of God. That the world is basically kind of a dream or a projection of the imagination of God, which is kind of an interesting idea. A more kind of recent version of idealism is Hegel, with his view that thesis and counter-thesis are actual metaphysical entities, and that history is a reflection of them. So in contrast to inductive reasoning, he would say thesis and counter-thesis actually exist, and they drive history, whether thesis and counter-thesis being a theory born from an observation of history. Cyclical theory is another thing which is kind of an idealist view of history. Anything that basically kind of assumes that a theme dominates reality, or that a narrative dominates reality, and that this comes from reason or parsimony or intuition rather than just empirical observation, is an idealist theory. Hopefully that makes sense. So the Platonist view holds that there are eternal, unchanging forms which are abstract ideas. These exist independently of people's minds. For instance, there is a conception of a circle, despite the fact that all circles in reality are not circles, but many-sided shapes our eyes can't tell apart. You can't make an actual circle in reality, because you can't actually have a round edge in reality. If you zoom in enough, you'll just notice that it's a bunch of lines that are in kind of a circular shape, but if you zoom in, they aren't actually round. They're just a lot of very, very, very tiny straight lines. So it's impossible to make a circle in reality. Because if you go down to this, like, the atomic level, you notice they aren't in a straight line. So that's kind of a core argument for Platonism. Platonism, as a rationalist philosophy, also argues that people have an innate understanding of things, like math. Like, they believe that someone knows 1 and 1 makes 2, regardless of the way they're brought up, regardless of environment. It's just a self-evident truth. So, they argue that these concepts have to exist because we have a view of things like circles or shapes or other things which are kind of idealized variants of something, and everything in existence is kind of an inferior version of this idealization. So basically, every category of something has an ultimate version. So like fire would have, there's somewhere an ideal fire that we compare all other fires against. It's kind of a collection of concepts that make up fire, even though all existing fires are kind of inferior versions of it. So kind of how it works in Platonism is everything, all the forms, everything in existence is a greater or lesser version of something. There's greater or lesser men, there's more perfect circles and less perfect circles. Like a less perfect circle would just basically look like a slightly rounded square. A more perfect circle you would not be able to tell wasn't a circle. There are greater and lesser fires. Suns could be viewed as a greater version of a fire, whereas like a match is like a lesser version of a fire. So there's degrees for everything. So ultimately there must logically be an ultimate degree of everything in existence. And this is kind of the Platonist conception of God, who they call the One, the Absolute, the Supreme, the Divine, etc. The exact nature of it is open for dispute. A lot of times it's kind of a panentheistic expression. Sometimes it's a deistic expression. It's basically the idea that at the heart of everything there is this force, this thing that is completely perfect. It is the idealization of truth, of justice, of goodness, of creative force, of basically everything in the universe comes from this thing and seeks desperately to return to it. Which is kind of interesting because this is rather similar to Hinduism, especially early Hinduism, which kind of hints at the fact that most of the Indo-European cultures have this similar philosophical element. And maybe I'll get into this later, and this is why I kind of feel that Christianity is, to at least some extent, is an Indo-European religion, despite the fact that it came from a Jewish background, so it has these elements to it. But that's neither here nor there. So, yes, so everything wishes to return to the One, everything wishes to become more like the One. It's a bit similar to the concept of theosis. The goal of humanity and the goal of all living beings and all things is to perfect themselves and become closer to the Absolute. So Thomas Aquinas really liked this argument because he thought it explained a lot of things. And I put this after design because this next part is rather similar to design. So Thomas Aquinas accepted Platonic forms. He saw them as ideas in the mind of God. So God has much like how you have an idea of what a circle is, the perfect circle is the way God formulates the idea of a circle. And since God's mind created the universe, therefore since he created the universe, his idea of what a perfect circle is what the universal idea of a perfect circle is. Within the universe, within physical experience, a perfect circle is what God imagined it to be. And thus, in essence, when we think about a circle, we are communing with that divine nature. We are glimpsing into the metaphysical realm, which is the mind of God, and we are seeing but a pale reflection of that. And this is the same for all sorts of things. And in Platonism and Neoplatonism, and eventually what that led to is Gnosticism, if you may have heard of, and other kind of esoteric philosophies, you have this concept of the one radiating, and their emanations from the one divine. And as they emanate and they cross the universe, you kind of have levels. Like, the further away you get from the divine, the less perfect something gets, and everything seeks to return to the divine. So it's often viewed as a series of spheres or something like that. So that, once again, you see this in Christianity and a lot of different religions. Angels, for instance, being kind of something that's closer to the divine. So the argument from degree. This is the argument as advanced from Thomas Aquinas. I forgot to put the quote in. This is from his 5 classical proofs for the existence of God without using the Bible. The 4th proof arises from the degrees which are found in things. For there is found a greater and lesser degree of goodness, truth, nobility, and the like. But more or less are terms spoken of various things as they approach in diverse ways towards something that is greatest. Just as in the case of hotter, more hot, that approaches nearer the greatest heat. Makes sense. There exists, therefore, something that is the truest and best, and most noble, and in consequence the greatest being. For what are the greatest truths are the greatest beings. As it is said in Metaphysics, Book 2, that's Aristotle, what moreover is the greatest in its way, in another way, is the cause of all things of its own kind. Thus fire, which is the greatest heat, is the cause of all heat. Well, that makes sense. It comes from the sun. As is said in the same book of Plato and Aristotle, therefore there exists something that is the cause of the existence of all things, and of goodness and of every perfection whatsoever, and this we call God. I think that's pretty straightforward. So essentially the idea is that God is the source of all good and true things. They all emanate from Him, and they are all imperfect versions of Him. Another way we look at it looking at it that I really like is in Christianity we have this idea that humanity is made in the image of God. So like God, we have a soul. God does have a soul. It's a kind of a different type of soul, but He has one. We have a will, a desire to create, and reason. We possess all these things that you can see mirrored in every religion in their version of the gods. With a couple exceptions, really speaking, if you have a god who is a personal being, he's very much like a human. So we can see gods kind of as idealized or perfected versions of ourselves, depending on the religion. Paganism's a bit weird because the gods in paganism are very flawed often and very imperfect, and they can die and stuff like that. But in deistic monotheism, it solves these problems more or less. So, God is basically the perfect form of a human. It is the infinite form of a human. God is the infinite being, the infinite self. So, rather straightforward argument. It seems pretty reasonable to me, at least, given that most things, for instance fire, have greater or lesser versions. The universe seems to seems to me at least to be composed of greater and lesser scales of the same basic concepts. For instance, a human body is made up of cells, and a society is made up of people that function much in the same way. I forget, I should get this, but there is a theory that all the different studies of physical life take place at different levels, but they're all interrelated. So you have like cellular theory, which is the lowest. Then you have like biology and medicine, which studies the body level. Then you have psychology, which studies people, individual people, but kind of collective, getting there. Then you have sociology. Then political science is above that. Then you get into like physics, and you just have this range of things, and there is interreflection between all of them. Because that is the nature of the universe, to have greater and lesser variants of the same thing, which it can be seen as a kind of a empirical proof for this concept of idealism. So it's not really an empirical argument, but I think it makes sense to a lot of people, and to me at least it seems pretty rational and intuitive, etc. So, with regards to the cumulative argument, I think this tells us a bit about God's nature and role in the universe. It provides us a conceptual framework for understanding the moral and design arguments, and we'll get to the moral argument next, better. and shows us that we can understand God to some extent by understanding ourselves. God is the supreme form of us. Therefore, we can understand him by seeing how we act to things, how we feel, what our dreams and aspirations are, and trying to project them onto an infinitely great being, which is admittedly impossible, but just because you can't fully understand something doesn't mean you can largely understand something or gain a lot of understanding of something. So this kind of appeals to a different group of people than some of the other arguments, and can be seen as being, it's a bit more mystical and kind of rationalistic and kind of idealistic, and some people don't really like the empirical stuff that much, and this just seems intuitively true, so I included it for that purpose. So next time up, Moral Argument. This is Argent Templar signing out.